Hello and welcome to Bengal Bites, the podcast where we satisfy your craving for Cincinnati Bengals news and analysis from a real, raw, unfiltered, independent perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 1. This is the 2023 preseason primer episode. If you caught our last show, episode 0, the pilot episode, that's where we talked about the who, why, what of the show. Why does the show even exist? All that stuff. So if you're not sure how you even got here, you can go back and check out that episode. Try to break down a little bit more of that. In this episode, we're going to set up this NFL season and explain how the NFL works, who are the Bengals, where do they fit into this whole NFL landscape, who everybody is, and I'm not going to assume any prior knowledge of you, the listener. Not going to assume anything. I know I talked about how this podcast is going to be for hardcore fans, but everybody's got to start somewhere, and everybody's not going to be a hardcore fan. So I want to be accessible and encouraging for anybody out there, not just Bengals fans. I got some feedback from some of my, friends who are Lions fans, or maybe they're fans of other teams, or maybe you just want to get into the NFL in general. I want everybody to be excited about the NFL and about the Bengals. So let's break some of that down. We're going to go through a little bit about just what is American football, because honestly, I had some friends at work who they wanted to get into football, but they were from other countries that didn't grow up around American football. I had no idea what it even was or how it worked. So just a quick explanation for somebody who, maybe you just came out of the desert. You're in Aaron Rodgers' darkness retreat for too long. You forgot, well, what is football? I don't know. So let me bring you back in from the wilderness. Let me explain to you. And, some people, you can skip this part. If you already know everything there is to know about football, you're probably not going to be that interested. But for the people who want a little bit more of a background to help them understand the game while they're watching it, this is going to be for you. After we do that, then we're going to dive into the Bengals team franchise, what it's all about, what are some things to know if you want to be a fan of the team, and specifically for this season, 2023, what are some things to be on the lookout for? We're also very quickly going to touch on the preseason game 1 that's coming up with the Green Bay Packers. We won't touch on that too much. We'll have our next episode will be a full review and recap breakdown of the first preseason game. But this is just more of a general preseason overview, because honestly, you don't need to do a preview of a preseason game. There's not going to be a lot of game planning, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So before we even get into the Bengals stuff, let's just set up the scene a little bit about American football and why would anybody even care? Why are we even paying attention to American football? If you didn't know, American football is, if not the most popular sport, it's definitely the most popular sport in the United States. Globally, I would say the other football, which we call soccer, is probably the most popular sport in the world. But in the United States here, American football is the dominant sport. And it seems like it's getting more and more popular every year. The ratings go up, even though traditional television broadcast ratings seem to be going down. The most popular programs every year are NFL football games, and specifically the championship game. It's called the Super Bowl. So if you've ever heard of the Super Bowl is the championship game. It's the final game of the NFL season, the professional football, American football season. But American football has a great importance in United States culture. It's played at all ages, all different levels, not just professionally, but amateur, high school, college, even small little league teams play this game. And it's got a long history. It originates from basically rugby. If you're familiar with rugby, it's kind of a variation or a derivative of rugby, where you've got a rectangular grass field and you've got two opposing teams. One team's on offense if they have the ball, the other team's on defense, and the offense tries to score by advancing the ball into the goal. The other team tries to stop them, prevent them from scoring, and take the ball away so that they can then be on offense and score themselves. So it's a territorial control game back and forth. It's not too dissimilar from other sports like soccer or hockey or lacrosse, where you're trying to move the ball or the puck or whatever object it is. Your team is trying to move it into the opponent's area, and they try to stop you, and vice versa. It's a lot like that. The only difference, there's a lot of differences, but some of the biggest differences between those other sports and American football is in soccer, you can't use your hands. So to possess the ball, you can just kind of dribble it with your feet, but you never actually physically hold on to the ball and possess it. Whereas in sports like rugby or football, you can use your hands, you can carry the ball in your arms and run with it, and the other team is going to try to tackle you and bring you down to the ground. So possession is a big thing in American football. The other thing that's different about that sport or other sports, football, I should say, and other sports, is that whereas other sports, the play style is more continuous, it's ongoing, it's fluid, American football is static in that it has set plays. The play is only 5 seconds long, maybe, from the time a ball is put into live action to the time the play is what's called blown dead, or the referee blows the whistle. When the whistle blows, everybody stops playing, regroup, and get ready for the next play, it's called. So the offense, when they have the ball, they're running set, predetermined, pre-strategized plays where they've already drawn up what they want to do. And when they snap the ball, everybody goes into motion, they do the play, and then they keep doing this over and over and over throughout the game. Each team gets a set of plays to advance the ball a certain amount of yards, which is 10 yards. If you get 10 yards in 4 plays or 4 downs, it's called, you get a new set of downs. And the field itself is 100 yards long. There's 2 end zones on each end. Each end zone is about 10 additional yards. So the total, it's 120 yards long. It's about 53 1/3 yards wide. And each team is moving the ball up and down this field of play. There's yard markers every 5 yards, 10 yards to try to make it visually distinct and visually easy for an audience how far away 5 yards, 10 yards is. So you can kind of tell. In the middle, you got the 50-yard line. That's the midpoint of the field. So the 2 teams are going back and forth. You can kind of imagine that like a soccer field or any other type of sport, basketball, like I said, lacrosse, rugby, where you're going back and forth over this kind of midpoint line, territorial control, and then who can finally push the ball into the goal. That's how you score what's called a touchdown. You get 6 points for scoring a touchdown. If you take the ball, push your opponent back all the way through into their end of the field, and it's the end zone, you get 6 points. Then you can get some extra bonus points after that if you kick the ball through these uprights. So each end of the field, there is a goalpost. It's like I don't know how you would describe a football upright if you've never seen one, but it's basically a set of poles that go up vertically into the air, basically 2 poles on either side, and it's got a connector in the middle. And if you can kick the ball up over the middle post and in between the 2 posts on either side, that's a goal. It's above the ground. It's unlike soccer where you kick it on the ground and there's a post that you have to kick it under. This is a little bit different where you have to kick the ball up over the posts through and you get the score. So you can do that after a touchdown. You can also get some points if you do that from without scoring a touchdown. You can score what's called a field goal, where you kick the ball through the uprights without pushing it through the end zone. You get 3 points for that. And vice versa at the other end, if the defense pushes the offense back so far into their own scoring area that the defense traps them basically and traps them into negative territory inside their own end zone, the defense scores what's called a safety, and that's 2 points. So those are the basic ways you can score points in American football. And what I mentioned, there's offense and there's defense. Now, every team has 11 players on the field at each time. One team is on offense, one team is on defense, and the defense is trying to take the ball away from the offense or stop the offense from moving the ball. Now, what happens when the defense takes the ball away from the offense? In other sports that are continuous, those players would all of a sudden just switch roles and the offense would become the defense and the defense would become the offense. But American football doesn't quite work like that. Since there are set plays and there's static start-stop in between each play, when the defense takes the ball away, an entirely different set of players substitutes onto the field. The football team, even though you can only have 11 players on the field at any one time, a football team has many more than 11 total players because everyone is specialized. Most players only play specifically on defense or specifically on offense, and they play a certain specific position, defined role, specialized role on the offense or the defense. It's not like all 11 players are playing the same position. Every position has a specialized role that they need to perform to get the best, make the best outcome out of that total group of players. So anyway, it's a long-winded way of saying everyone on the team has their own specialized role. And as a player, you don't play every single snap of the game. Most people, you'd be too tired. So what they do is substitute defense for offense, offense for defense. And there are even kickers and punters and holders and people who snap the ball for kicks, very specialized roles. So you can have, if you have a college football team, if you look on the sidelines of a college roster where there's almost no limitations, you'll have over 100 players and guys, they don't have 100 numbers. So you'll have guys who are wearing duplicate numbers sometimes, people who have the same number. They can't be you can't have the same number on the field twice. So if you have two people that have the same number, only one can be at the game at the same time. But you get the idea where a lot of people can play football and participate and be on the team. So that may be part of where the popularity of football comes in because so many different people can play. It's not like for basketball, let's say, if you're not extremely tall, you're probably not going to have a really successful basketball career. Obviously, there are exceptions, people who are just very skilled and talented who aren't that tall. But for the most part, if you look at people who are, professional basketball players, they're 6'3" and up, right? So football, you've got a much wider variety of body types. You can have small, fast guys. You can have big, fat guys, slow guys, people who can do all types of different roles. It's very accessible to a lot of different people, and maybe that's why it's accessible to a lot of different fans. Outside of that, there's a lot of rules, and I won't even attempt to go into all of the rules of football. There's way too many. I would say if you want to know more about the details of the sport, check out Wikipedia, check out Google, check out Pro Football Reference, ESPN, NFL.com, Pro Football Focus. There's so many different resources out there that you can get more knowledge and understanding of the game, but I'm just trying to do a little bit of a quick overview at a high level. But that being said, when you see these yellow flags or these yellow pieces of cloth getting tossed onto the field, what that means, what that indicates is that there's some kind of an infraction or a violation of the rules. There's the referees who are on the field, you'll see them wearing the black and white stripes. They're, the zebras, they call them. They're the referees, they're the officials. They're the ones who officiate, referee the game, make sure everybody's following the rules, but also to stop the play when the play is dead or when the play is over, they blow the whistle to let everybody know, everybody who's in the fight, please stop fighting. Fight is over for about 20 seconds. Then when everybody plays again, you can start fighting again. But the referees are there to kind of, if you watch a boxing match, you have to have a referee at a boxing match, just kind of officiate everything, make sure everybody's fighting fair, let's say. So when you see these yellow flags thrown on the field, that means somebody did something wrong, somebody broke the rules somehow, and a penalty needs to be enforced. And usually penalties are applied by moving the ball up and down the field based on whoever committed the penalty. So obviously, if your team committed the penalty, they're going to move the ball away from where you want to go, away from the goal. So if you have a 5-yard penalty, it's going to move the ball 5 yards further away from where you want the ball to go in the end. It's going to make it more difficult for you to score points. So obviously, you don't want to commit penalties as a team. Penalties are bad because that hinders what you're trying to do, which is move the ball towards the goal. You can also have some other type of penalties which could possibly disqualify a player from a game if they do something what's called unsportsmanlike, or, especially like if somebody throws a punch. Now, I said it was a fight. I said it's a violent, controlled, organized street fight. But there are some rules, like you can't just openly, with a closed fist, swing at another player. It's not that type of a literal fight. So if somebody does something like that that's outwardly violent, hostile, I think they say it's not a football move. So sometimes you'll see way back in the archives pulling off other players' helmets and swinging them like clubs at the other players. That's obviously something you might see in a street fight, but that's not what you want to see on a football field for audiences and young fans, as men swinging large plastic objects at each other's heads. That's not really the sport we're looking for. So you see things like that, that'll get you kicked out of the game and probably suspended for multiple games or perhaps even the season. And so there's things like that, but usually you don't see too many penalties where somebody gets kicked out of a game. I will admit I myself got kicked out of a game one time for a non-football act, but that guy had it coming because honestly, look, he was coming at me after the whistle blew. Okay, he was going against the rules. First of all, he started it. Okay, they blew the whistle. This guy starts running at me. I'm like, what? So I grab him, I throw him on the ground, and then while I'm standing over top of him, I may have kicked him in the helmet and then screamed, "Do you want some of me?" But, that's what happens. You're in the moment, the testosterone's flowing, you're aggressive. That's just what happens. You just get crazy. It takes over you. And sometimes when you're a fan, you get that same feeling, that craziness, like you're just sitting there, you're a normal person, you wouldn't hurt a fly. And then all of a sudden, you're losing your mind. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. So that's some of that, I've tempered that in my fan. Like I'm not the type of fan who would punch a hole in my wall or kick the dog or anything like that. But this sport just makes your mind do crazy things. You just get so amped up, so like aggressive and ready to fight. And sometimes you just have to remember yourself, hey, pull it back a second here. This is a game. We're still in humanity, in civilization. We're not cavemen fighting each other with sticks or something. So as much fun as it is to just let yourself get washed away in the excitement, you just have to keep control, keep grounded a little bit sometimes. But sometimes it is fun to let go too. I know. But anyway, penalties, rules, all that stuff aside, there is also a lot of strategy and planning that goes into playing in the football game at all levels, especially, professionals with anything, they're going to prepare and get ready much more than anyone who's an amateur. So from a professional standpoint, they've been getting ready for this for weeks and months. There's different types of plays, different types of strategies. The most basic play is a running play where the offense just tries to push the defense back and run the ball, carry the ball over them, through them, push them out of the way, and it's the defense's job to try to stop them. Or maybe the offense will try to do a little bit of misdirection, fake like they're going to run away and then run it the other way. Maybe get the defense looking one way, go the other way, do a little crossover move on them. They can do it like that. Or maybe the offense will try to throw the ball. It's called pass play. And when you do these different type of plays, every team has 11 players on offense, but not all 11 do the same jobs, and not all 11 are really able or eligible to carry the ball or catch the ball or run with the ball. So just in general, you just have offensive linemen who are the 5 big guys up front. They're not allowed to catch the ball. They're not allowed to go downfield, catch passes, and run with the ball. Their entire purpose in the game is to block, to be big movers of other people. They get out in front of everything, and when they're running the ball, they try to push everybody out of the way. And if the offense is trying to pass the ball, then those 5 guys up front try to protect the quarterback, who is the one we'll get to next. But the offensive linemen try to protect the passer of the ball and make sure that nobody else tackles him or sacks him before he's able to throw to the other receivers who are running down the field to catch the ball. The other important player to know outside the offensive line is the quarterback. Now, there's 5 members up on the front of the offensive line. The guy in the middle is called the center. The center starts every play. So he'll come up and grab the ball, or he'll put the ball in his hands, but he has to leave it on the ground. The ball has to stay touching on the ground. Once the center snaps the ball or brings the ball up off of the ground through his legs and quite close to his genitals, the center will take the ball, basically place it between his own legs, very close to his genitals, and then another man will reach through that man's legs, also putting his hands extremely close to that man's genitals. If there weren't, we're talking about a lot of men's genitals, but the man grabs the ball from there, and then the quarterback, as it's called, he can either run it himself, he can give it to another player on the team, or he can drop back or take a few steps back and throw the ball down the field to somebody else. And they can, if they catch it, then chaos ensues. But the quarterback's job not only is to kind of be the point guard, if you're familiar with basketball, where the point guard distributes the ball to the other players. That's kind of what the quarterback's job is, to be the distributor of the ball. The quarterback also is generally the one who has to communicate the most to all the other players on offense about what are they going to do on that play. So most of the time, you'll have a coach standing on the sidelines or somebody else standing on the sidelines to communicate to the quarterback what the play is going to be. The quarterback takes that message and then relays that to the rest of the team, the other 10 guys on offense, before they go out and run the play. Say, okay, guys, I got the play from the coach. The play is going to be XYZ. All right, everybody, let's do the play on 1. And of course, there's a cadence. We can get into that. But basically, the quarterback comes up and verbally, with his voice, looks at the team, make sure everybody's ready to go, and then he'll give commands for the offense about when the center should snap the ball, when the play should start. So the quarterback has a lot of responsibilities in terms of getting everyone organized, making sure everyone's on the same page. Everyone needs to get lined up. Of course, the quarterback can't literally be responsible for everyone, but they usually, say it's the quarterback's responsibility just to kind of be the captain out there, be the captain of the ship, make sure everyone's doing what they need to do and keep things running. But of course, everybody needs to be responsible for their own role, their own responsibility as well. It can't just be up to the quarterback to do everything, obviously. So you've got some other positions on offense. You've got running backs, which, like the name sounds, the quarterback hands the ball off to the running back, and the running back runs behind the offensive line. Those big blockers up front, those running backs run behind them, and they try to advance the ball forward. You've also got receivers or wide receivers who split out further away. They get horizontal, lateral separation from the big blockers up front. They try to give themselves a little bit more space so that they can run down the field and get separation away from the other defenders. Their biggest thing as a receiver is to try to make space, to get open, to try to position themselves somewhere on the field where the defenders are not, so that the quarterback can throw them the ball without any interference from the defense, and that they can catch it. And then after they catch it, they can run until the defense tackles them to the ground. You've also got some kind of position that's kind of like a hybrid between a receiver and an offensive lineman that's known as the tight end position. It's kind of like he's kind of a big lineman who goes out for passes, or you can think of him as a smaller, or I guess he's a big receiver or a small offensive lineman. One of the two, kind of a hybrid in-between position. And one position you don't see too much of it anymore is the fullback position, which is just kind of a big running back who also blocks. So kind of like a running back who's also a offensive lineman. But you don't see too many of those. Usually you just have tight ends who are the kind of in-between blocking, receiving, catching type guys. But there's all kinds of, those are just kind of the general offensive positions. There's all kinds of different players, and all kinds of different plays use different players. You don't have to use the same combination of players on every play. Usually you're going to have a quarterback, you're you're going to have 5 offensive linemen, but you could have 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, no tight ends. You could have 1 tight end, 1 running back, 3 wide receivers. You can mix it up, use different combinations of players. Depends on what the strengths of your offense, what kind of personnel your team has. If you've got good receivers, you're going to obviously have more plays that use a lot of good, receiver plays. If you've got a strong running back group, you're going to use more running backs in most of your plays. So it sets up a lot of different things that you can do strategically on offense. Now, vice versa, on defense, they also have different players, different plays, and they're doing a totally different objective. They're trying to stop the offense, stop those plays. Now, by contrast, the defense, they also have big guys and they have little guys and fast guys and all that different roles, but the defense is a lot more reactionary than offense. Offense is attacking. You're trying to advance. You're trying to attack. You're advancing. You're enforcing your will. You're imposing your will onto the other team and saying, the offense, as the offense, we're going to push the ball. We're going to push you back, and you're going to have to stop us. And we're going to just prove that we're too tough and we're too big and you can't stop us, and we're going to score all over you. And your mom and your dad and your aunt and uncle up in the stands are going to see you get embarrassed. But for the defense says, no way, buddy. We're going to set up and we're going to react to whatever you come at us with. We're going to be ready for it. So it's a lot more reactionary. You can't really have a set defensive play per se. I mean, they do have plays, they do have strategy, but it can't quite be as predetermined about what the defense wants to do, because the defense is still dictated by what the offense is doing. You, as a defender, and when you're calling the defensive strategy, you still have to react to what the offense is doing. Up front, the offensive line has 5 guys up front. Defensive line usually has less big guys up front, more smaller, lighter, faster guys to try to be more reactionary. So there's usually 3 or 4 big defensive linemen. So the bigger guys in the game of football are called linemen. You've got defensive interior linemen and the defensive exterior or defensive ends, guys who play on the ends, guys who play on the interior. They're up front. They're just trying to cancel out the big offensive linemen. The offensive linemen try to push forward. Defensive linemen push back, resist to opposing forces fighting against each other. Same thing, on defense, you've got linebackers who play a little bit behind the line. They're there, kind of like the counterparts to the running backs are the linebackers. The running backs stand behind the offensive line, behind the quarterback, a few, maybe 5 yards or so behind the play, and they're ready to run up with the ball and attack. Linebackers stand opposite, and they basically try to mirror the movement of the running back. Wherever the running back goes, that's where the linebacker goes. If the running back looks like he's going right, linebackers are going to flow to the right. They're going to start moving to the right. They're going to mirror them. And if the running back moves forward towards the line of scrimmage, the linebacker is going to come up and meet them. So basically mirror their movement. Whichever way they go, the linebacker should, in theory, meet them so that they can come up and stop them and prevent them from moving forward. Obviously, the running back tries to elude the linebackers, get away. Don't let this guy mirror my movements. So you try to, fake one way and go the other to get the linebacker going the direction that you want him to go, and then cross it over, go right and then fake to the left or whatever. So you can get away from that way. And then behind all that, you've got the defensive backs. So they've got different names. They're called safeties and cornerbacks, but basically it's a bunch of smaller, faster. It's all relative. When I say smaller, I mean smaller compared to the linemen, but smaller, still big guys who are reacting to what's going on. Either if it's a run or a pass, the people in the defensive backfield are just going to react, either try to break up the pass or come up and tackle whoever is running the ball. But they're just out there playing kind of like outfield for baseball. Like you're so far away from the infield that you just have to react as a defensive back to whatever is in your area, whatever is in your zone. Defenses can play different types of strategy. They can play different types of pass coverage. So if they try to defend against the pass, there's 2 general basic strategies. There's either man-to-man coverage or zone coverage. And if you're familiar with other sports, like in basketball, this concept is the same. Man-to-man coverage, you're one-on-one as a defender with the offensive player, and you just try to mirror them, match them wherever they go on the field. It's your responsibility to cover them and try to stop them from doing whatever they want to do. The other strategy is called zone coverage, where you don't follow necessarily a particular player, but your responsibility on defense is just to defend anything that comes into your area. You're responsible for an area of the field on that play, and every member of your team is responsible for their own separate area. No two players are covering the same zone or same area of the field. If they are, it's a mistake. So if you're in zone coverage, you should not be standing right next to your teammate. You and your teammate should be spread apart so that you're effectively able to react quickly to whatever is on the field at that time. Different teams play it differently, and you can play kind of a mix of the two. Sometimes you can have half the guys playing zone and other half playing man, or it depends on all kinds of different things where you are on the field. But those are the two basic defensive strategies that teams are going to try to employ. And you can do things like what's called blitzing, where if you blitz, that means you are, as a defender, you're going to take one of your defensive players, usually a defensive back or a linebacker, and when they would normally, instead of going back to defend the pass or normally react, they would be attacking, trying to cross the line of scrimmage as quickly as possible to try to disrupt the play and blow it up before it can even happen. So a blitz is when the defense is going to try to send extra guys at the quarterback to try to make him throw it too fast or to try to sack him before he can do what he wants to do. So a blitz is an aggressive move by a defense to try to put some pressure on the offense. Now, it's a risk reward because for every player that the defense sends on the blitz, that's one player that can't go back to pass protect. They can't go back. So if the quarterback does get the pass off before the blitz can get him, before the blitz can sack him, then that's one more person who's not down the field to make the tackle. So that could cause either a good play for the defense or that could create a big play for the offense. If the blitz doesn't work, it could be a big risk for the defense. All right, and finally, we've got our special teams. It's called the kickers. The kicker, place kicker, field goal kicker, punters, punt returners, kick returners, long snappers. These are all very specialized plays. They are exciting plays, but they take up a very small portion of the game. They're still on the team. They still get paid, but they don't, they only play for maybe 5 or 10 plays per game, whereas, an entire football game may be over 100 plays, over 120 plays, considering both teams are going to be on offense. Usually both teams have about 60 to 65 plays on offense. The kickers are only in for maybe about 10% of the plays, but they do make up an important part of the game in terms of field position, because the game is all about moving the ball up and down, back and forth on the field, and punting the ball is changing the field position. So it's an important part of the game. Can't forget about that. All right, now the NFL. The NFL is the premier professional football league in America, founded in 1920. It's been ongoing over 100 years. There's 32 teams in all different states, all different cities across the United States. So far, we haven't gotten any in any other countries. There was maybe some rumors about moving to Canada or the United Kingdom or maybe Germany, but so far, all the teams are located geographically inside the United States. The NFL itself is split up into two main conferences, the AFC, or the American Football Conference, and the NFC, or the National Football Conference. These are two kind of holdover remnants from two previously competing leagues, the AFL and the NFL. The AFL merged with the NFL about almost 60 years ago, not quite 60 years ago. And ever since then, that merger, the end game is called the Super Bowl. So when the AFL and the NFL merged together, that's when they started doing this Super Bowl game. In theory, the goal for all these 32 teams is to win the Super Bowl. I mean, that should be the goal in any sport. Every team wants to win the championship, win the title. It's a little bit strange. It's a little bit different in football, in the NFL, than in other sports. Where in other sports like maybe car racing, like NASCAR or Formula One, or in golf, in horse racing, in a lot of other sports for cash prizes, whoever wins gets the biggest prize. They get the purse, it's called. In football, the people who win the Super Bowl don't necessarily get any cash prize. There's not like a big reward for the owner for winning the Super Bowl. In fact, it may not even be the goal of the owner. I mean, it should be, but in reality, every owner wins every year if they make money. And all of these teams do make a lot of money every single year. So if we want to be realistic, the goal is for everyone to make the most money. All the owners on every team are trying to make the most money. All the players are trying to make the most money. All the coaches are trying to make the most money. Everybody is trying to make the most money for themselves. Obviously, if they win the Super Bowl, that's going to bring a lot of interest to the team. More fans are going to buy their merchandise, buy tickets to the games, pay money to the team. And so that's going to be good for business. As an owner, you want to have a good team as opposed to a terrible team that doesn't win any games and nobody shows up and nobody cares. But there's something to be said for profitability, and that's more so than winning, especially for Cincinnati. In Mike Brown's case, I'm going to say that winning is one of the goals. It may not be the primary goal. The primary goal is making money. And that's, like I said, that's the goal for everybody. This goal for the players, it's a goal. So if you're a player, from your perspective, how do you make the most money? Well, if you're a good player and you go to the Super Bowl, that's great. Maybe you get a little bit of a bonus in your contract if you have some kind of incentives in your contract where they say, oh, if you go to the playoffs, you get, $200,000 extra dollars. If you win a playoff game, you get this. If you win the Super Bowl, you get this. If you go to the Pro Bowl, maybe get some individual awards, you get this. So as a player, to make the most money, it's for superstar players, if you get the most awards, maybe you'll get promotional endorsement money. You'll get, Nike and Gatorade and all the big corporate sponsorships that are going to pay you tons of money. If you're a star player and your team is good, then that makes it more likely that people are going to want to pay you more money. If you're a player who's on the back end of the roster, making the most amount of money for you is being on the team and getting a game check. It's a big difference between how much money you make versus being on the practice squad, being on the active roster, and playing in the game. If you're not even on the team, that's a big difference too. So if they cut you and release you and you're not even getting a paycheck, well, you're not making the most money you could. So the biggest thing for a lot of guys is just staying healthy, not getting injured, being able to continue to play, to keep having a job, to keep paychecks coming in. And really, isn't that what we're all doing? We're all just out there trying to keep that job going, just keep those paychecks coming in, just keep it going, man. And for the owners, they're trying to collect the most profit as they can, whether they're winning or losing. It's obviously better to have a competitive team, a team that has a chance, a team that you can feel good about rooting for, that's not totally out of it and just an embarrassment. They don't want that. And that's what we had a few years ago. Zach Taylor's first year and Marvin Lewis's last year as coach. Those are some lean, rough years as fans. And I'm sure they were not making as much money as they could. But because of all these other TV deals, broadcast deals, all these teams split the revenue from the league. Each team gets 1/32 of this big pool of revenue. So even when the Bengals are terrible and their fans aren't coming to the games, Mike Brown is still getting millions and millions of dollars. So the fact that they're putting in even a tiny bit of effort now, that the fact the stadium lease is expiring in 2026, don't forget that. But the fact that they're putting in just a little bit of effort for the fan experience at Paycor Stadium, or it used to be Paul Brown Stadium, it's just to make more money. Like they're talking about how they're going to add all these improvements. Well, all these improvements are like improvements for concession stands, so you can buy beer faster and buy snacks faster and buy stuff faster. is that really an improvement for the fan experience, or is that an improvement for profitability for the Bengals and making more money? You tell me. All that to say is money is the biggest driving factor. And if you look at any of the games, there are corporate sponsorships, ads everywhere. And the Super Bowl is like I said, the Super Bowl is the biggest. The Super Bowl is the most watched sporting event, and the Super Bowl is the most expensive program to advertise on because so many people throughout the world are watching it. It's an event unlike any other. So corporate sponsors are pumping money into the league as it's growing, and there is a limit to how much money the players can make. That is based off of how much the league is making. So it's called the salary cap. So this year, 2023, the NFL players, each team is limited to $225 million for their whole roster. For the whole year, they're able to spend $225 million for all the players. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, of course. I mean, of course it is. But when you consider that you've got 53 players on the active roster and 16 players are on your practice squad, they might not all count against your salary cap, but you've got a lot of transactions and things you need to do to spread out this money. Take that on top of the fact that a lot of the highest paid players in the league these days are getting $50 million or more. So if you've got a cap of 225 and one player is taking 50 of that 225, that's a big portion of your cap that's going to be just for that one player. I'm just doing quick math here. 22.2% of your total team budget basically is going to go to one player. And so that's one way you can construct a team. Other teams do it differently. Other teams may not pay the star player $50 million. Maybe they'll divide it up a little bit more evenly. But the point is, every team is not able, or one team with all the money, the most money, the richest owner can't just come in and buy up all the best players, have the best team, and just beat everybody and win the championship every year. It's not really that much fun. That wouldn't be what anybody wants to see from a competitive aspect. If your team never had a chance to win, you would just tune out, unless you're the Milwaukee Brewers. But so there is a salary cap. There are some things to create some parity in the league to make it more even, so that this talent is spread out more evenly. They also do what's called the draft. So in addition to capping how much money each team can spend per year on all of its players, they also make it fair, or try to create a somewhat fair system to equalize the talent and the skill between the teams. So if a team is not doing that good, they need some new players, they can get some in the draft. The draft is where new players from college coming in, joining the league, they want to join new teams. They can't just join whatever team they want. Unfortunately, they have to get picked. Like you're out at recess at school and you're getting picked for your team. Kind of a similar concept where the teams try to pick the best players that they want to be on their team. And it's a little bit weird in the NFL where they do it. The last place team from the previous season gets the first pick in the draft, and vice versa. The first place team, or the team that won the Super Bowl previously, they get the last pick in the draft. So in theory, it makes it so that the teams that aren't really that good should get the first pick at all the best players, to try to equalize or balance out any competitive mismatch or any competitive imbalance that there may exist in the talent. After if the team is bad for multiple years, they should, after many years of being able to draft better and better players, that should help them get back into competitiveness. If they're not, then there's maybe something else going on in the organization that would cause them to not be good. Okay, now let's talk about just a quick recap of a standard NFL season, what any fan should expect out of the NFL season. I already mentioned that the end goal ends in the Super Bowl, but where does it start? Well, if we go back to the beginning, really the beginning is right after the Super Bowl, which usually takes place in February. The next year usually begins in March. March is the beginning of the free agency period. Initially, when the NFL started, and anytime you're going to start any new league, you have to get new players, you have to sign up new contracts. So free agency is the time where you're able to sign new available players to new contracts. Any players who don't have a contract from another team that ran out of contract, didn't sign for whatever reason, and they're available on the market, they can sign with the new team and join up with them in March. Also in March is when you have the pre-draft combine, which is kind of a strange thing. It's a televised event, but it's basically a job interview that's televised, but it's also kind of like a livestock slave auction or something. Basically, all the players get weighed and measured and poked and prodded, and they see how tall they are, how much they weigh, how long their fingers are, how long their arms are, how long their legs are. Do they have any medical history in their background? Does their family have any history? Like, do they have any criminal history? How fast can they run? How far can they jump? How high can they jump? How much can they lift weights? How much can they catch a football? How much can they throw a football? All these types of things that get measured. And it's partly an evaluation process for the teams to see who is going to fit onto their team, who has the most skill. But it's also kind of a psychological test of these guys to see who can go through this rigorous process of getting interviewed by all of these different teams, ask all kinds of strange questions, being examined by all these different strange doctors, and you're, disrobed and disclothed. It's very disarming. But it's also a show on the NFL Network for just the casual fan to sit there and watch and see all these guys that you've been watching. If you're a college football fan, you get to see all these guys and see how they measure up to, how do the Big Ten athletes measure up from the athletes from the SEC, and the SEC versus the defunct Pac-12 or ACC or whatever other leagues there are, conferences there are. So you can kind of see how everybody's going to stack up on a level playing field, although it's still not a realistic evaluation, because I say they should do all that in full pads, like helmets, like the full thing, because they do these draft combine workouts and all these pro day workouts also. So this is all leading up to the draft that's in April, but all these college players, they do workouts for the NFL teams, like an interview, to get ready, to show off what they can do, to, give the teams something to be enticed by, to want to draft them and get paid a lot of money. Like I said, the earlier you're picked in the draft, the higher salary you're going to get. It's not even a question anymore, since these salaries are already predetermined by the rookie wage scale. You, as a rookie, want to do everything you can to convince these teams that you're worth the draft pick, that basically you're worth the money that they're essentially laying out for you as a player. So it's all a sales pitch from you, and they've got agents, because the agents get a commission off of the player's contract. They get a percentage for how many millions of dollars it is. Each year the player gets X million dollars. The agent gets a cut of that. So it's in the agent's best interest to get the player the best draft pick so they can get the most money. That's what this is all about. So the players go through these processes, and some of them train, they get special coaches, they have special diets, they do all this stuff. I think they should do it in full pads, because that would be how you would play. Obviously, the players don't want to do all these like 40-yard dashes and sprint drills and quick agility drills in pads, because it would make them look slower and their times wouldn't be as impressive. But I think it would be more realistic and give you a better idea of how the players are going to actually perform when they get out onto the football field versus how they're going to run around in their underwear. If the game isn't played in your underwear, why are they running around and evaluating the guy? It doesn't make sense to me, but maybe that makes sense. I'm not a coach. I'm not a scout. So maybe they will do that one day when I have my own league. But until then, that's how they do it. Part of the draft is draft picks are an asset for the teams. Every team by default, there's 7 rounds in the draft. Every team gets 1 pick, but the teams are able to trade draft picks for other assets. So that can be other players, other draft picks. So that's part of the strategy from the person who manages the players and the structure of the roster, which usually is referred to as the general manager of the team. The Bengals, as it turns out, don't have a general manager, and it may be one of the only teams, if not the only teams, that don't have an official general manager. They have a guy who acts basically in the role of the general manager, but they don't give him that title because Mike Brown still wants to kind of be known as, Mike Brown's the owner, by the way. We'll get to him in a second. He wants to be known as the puppet master of all this. But basically, it's this old man who wants to be the puppet master, but he doesn't want to be known as the general manager. He wants to be the president, so the Bengals don't really have a general manager. But Duke Tobin is basically the Bengals general manager. His real title is something like vice president of player personnel or senior vice president or whatever it is. Something like that of player personnel. But he's the general manager. He's the one that makes most of the general manager decisions. And then in the end, Mike Brown, the owner, probably has some kind of influence on what they do in the end. A lot of these owners are probably involved more than they want to admit. Part of the reason they have the general manager is that so the owner can blame somebody else. When the owner makes a bad decision, they don't want to take the responsibility for it. They want to fire the guy who they said made the bad decision so they can have the general manager. I guess maybe you could say that's an honorable thing by Mike Brown, and he's not making anybody else take the fall for his bad decisions, of which he's made many. So maybe there's some responsibility that he's taking. I don't know. But they don't have a general manager, but they all these teams pick who they want, who the best players are going to be. They try to size them up, see who's the fastest, who's the best, who's going to be insane and end up in prison 5 years from now. These are all real factors that you have to consider when you're picking these players. But once you get through the entire draft process, everybody gets picked, then they break for the summer and everybody goes to their team that they're going to be with for the year, and they start to get training. They have a rookie camp where the rookies come in, they get acclimated in May and try to figure out, kind of where to live. I'm in this new city I've never even been before. These guys are coming from all over the country, all over the world. They've never been to Cincinnati, Ohio. So they have to figure out where to live, where to go, where not to go, and all that kind of stuff, and figure out how to do a new job. So, that's like anything. If you've ever switched jobs, switched cities, had to find a new place to live, it's definitely a stressful experience. It can be. And when you're, also a young player, like in your early 20s, it's kind of a hard thing to do in your life. So you have to consider that when these players are coming in right out of college and you're like, oh, these draft picks, I can't believe they're so immature. It's like, yeah, they are kids basically with a lot of money in brand new cities. Life can be crazy when you're in that situation. So you never know. But once they get through the summer, they find a place to live, or they're already settled into their city, training camp kicks off. Training camp this year started for most teams at the end of July. Before the official training camp, they have some practices throughout the summer just to kind of keep everyone in tune with what's going on. Part of it is so the guys don't just go home and drink beer and sit on the couch and don't do anything. Part of it is to make sure the guys are still engaged. They're still working out with the team. They want them to be training all year round, so they're not just losing ground, getting out of shape. They're professional athletes. They need to keep their bodies in top physical condition. So part of it is kind of just busy work, just to keep the guys around. So they do things like put things into their contract or give them incentives, workout bonuses, they're called, where guys, if they stick around, they do the workouts with the team, they get paid extra money for it. So once they get through the summer, they do training camp, which if you've ever heard of like 2-a-day practices, they don't do 2-a-day, multiple practices per day anymore because of the union collective bargaining agreement. They're like, it's too much physical exertion on the body. We need to protect our bodies, which is the thing that we make the money with, and having all these multiple practices. And I did it when I was in high school, and thinking back on it now, it's insane. Why did we even do that? I don't know why would we have 2 practices in the hottest time of the year in July. We would practice at like 7:00 in the morning because, I guess they wanted to, in theory, miss the hottest part of the day. We would practice at 7:00 in the morning and like 1:00 in the afternoon or something, and like 2-hour practices. So we were practicing like 4 hours a day. What? And we were only I was like 15, 16 years old. I'm thinking about this now. It's like insane. Why was I doing that to myself? I wasn't even getting paid money. These guys are out there in the NFL. I mean, they're getting hit a lot harder than I was when I was 15 years old. So I wouldn't want to do 4 hours of that. But these days, they don't do multiple practices. Most of the practices are like hour and 45 minutes, under 2 hours for the most part. And they do make contact, but where football is a physical, violent, impact sport, not just a contact sport. Football is an impact sport. You're not just rubbing up against the guy. You're rubbing at 20 miles an hour going in the opposite direction. It's a lot more of an impulse on your body, a lot of shock that goes into the joints, your muscles. All of these practices, they accumulate and add up over time. And every practice that you go through, you're taking shocks, hits to the body. You want to stay fresh. You don't want to take too much abuse. You don't want to take too much abuse to the body before you even get into any competition that matters. So going through training camp is mostly to learn to get into sync, to coordinate with the rest of the team, how you're going to run through your offensive plays, how the defense is going to react to offensive plays, how your special teams, kickers, and everything is going to work. Then you get into preseason. Preseason is now 3 exhibition games. They don't count for the standings. They don't count for the official statistics or records, but they are important. Most of the starters don't play in the preseason, especially the first 1 or 2 preseason games. It's mostly the backups, but it is important for those guys because these are the players who aren't going to play the majority of the time during the regular season as long as somebody's not hurt. But that's the thing is, if somebody gets hurt, any of these guys may have to come in and play the entire game at any point. And these preseason games are some of the only times during the entire year where these guys are going to get to play real live action to simulate what it's going to be like if they do actually get into the game and get into play. It's not going to be their first experience and they're just going to have no clue what's going on. So this is important for those guys, even though it doesn't count for the records, it doesn't count for the standings. It is very important. It counts very much for those backup guys on second string, third string, and just to show what you can do as a player, because when they start training camp, they have 90 players on the roster, people who could potentially make the team. They don't know which ones, obviously, before they start. If they did, they wouldn't bring all 90, but they need some people just to be there, kind of be camp bodies, just to take up space, to basically be a tackling dummy, or to be some cannon fodder to go against for the starters to beat up on, who aren't going to be necessarily the backups. But some of these guys, they know they're not going to make the roster. It probably would have been me if I would have gone to an NFL training camp. I would have been that guy who's definitely not making the roster. But some of these guys, so you got 90 players who go into the training camp initially. 53 players are going to make the official roster, and then 16 players go on to what's called the practice squad. It's kind of a reserve squad of overflow spare players. And so 53 plus 16, so that's 69 players that you're going to have on the team total. So you're going to have to get rid of or say goodbye to 21 other players at least. And you may sign some players. It's always in flux throughout the league with players coming and going from different teams. It's not like the old days where a player would go to one team and play for one team his entire career, never leave, never move to any other city. Players come and go. One player may be playing on one team one week and playing against his former team the next week because he got traded. So these players are kind of interchangeable parts. And a lot of the times you can lose track of which player is on which team, and you're just looking at different jerseys. A lot of people say you're rooting for laundry or cheering for the laundry, but it is important to keep the players in mind because they're, in my mind, the most important part of the game. So for the preseason, the starters may play maybe the very last preseason game or a little bit of the second preseason game. Some teams do it differently. Joe Burrow really hasn't had any preseason experience. A lot of the star players don't feel like they need it. Joe Burrow probably feels like he needs it, but hasn't been able to get it due to injury and other weird circumstances we'll get into. But the preseason, it's important. Some people think it's boring. I think it's actually really interesting because a lot of these guys, this is their only opportunity in their lives that they're ever going to have to get to play in an NFL game. They don't care that it's not a quote unquote real game. That, as you know, their families are in the stands, their friends are watching at home. They are wearing the jerseys. It says NFL. It says the NFL logo of the team that they've been cheering for maybe since they were a little kid. So it's their dream to get out there and show the world what they can do, whether it's preseason or regular season or whatever it is. Some of those guys are out there playing their hearts out. I remember last season, our linebacker, Clay Johnston, he had 20 tackles in one preseason game. He was out there making tackles and just scraping himself up off of the dirt every time. And then he would just throw himself at the guy, make a tackle. And then he just looked like he was like peeling his body up so slowly. It took so much effort to get up. He was like fighting like he was Rocky Balboa in a 15-round heavyweight fight. It was so amazing. And it's the preseason. It was great. And it was great as a spectator to watch him exert himself so much, put himself through so much just to make the team. And he did make the team. And a lot of it, you have to think, had to be because of that amazing performance that he put out there for everybody to see. And even if he didn't make the team, every other team gets to see that on tape. That's the thing that they say is the eye in the sky don't lie. All 31 other teams are going to see that performance. And even if the team that you're currently on doesn't have room for you for whatever reason, they can't match your salary needs, or they just have too many guys at your same position, they may get rid of you. All the 31 other teams are going to look at that and say, wow, that was an amazing performance. We need that player on our team, and they can sign you. So you're trying out not just for your own team, you're trying out for every team throughout the league just to show what you can do on an NFL stage, putting your skills on display. Even though they're not the famous multi-million-dollar superstar athletes that you know and you see in your fantasy leagues, these guys are out there giving it everything they have on every single play, or you at least hope they do. And if they don't, then you won't see them for very long. But after the preseason is concluded, that's when the teams trim down their roster. They do roster cut downs. And if you've ever seen the HBO show Hard Knocks, they used to give you a more in-depth look at what teams went through when they did the training camp. They cut down. They used to have multiple trimming of the roster. Now it's just one day, everybody gets cut all immediately. So it's a big 21 players are all released on the same day, and they're released out into the wild and could be claimed by any other team. And this big wild transaction period where teams are signing guys. And part of it is you can make your 53-man roster, and then all of a sudden there's a bunch of new players out in the market, and you say, oh, wait, I kind of like that guy. So you can take one of those players that is out there and replace one of your players on your current 53 roster, let them go, replace them with one of these other cool guys from one of these other teams, and swap it around. It's all a game, a puzzle that all these teams and all these different managers are trying to use these different players as puzzle pieces to construct and build the best possible, strongest team while doing it within the confines of this budget of $225 million. Once they figure out who's going to be on the active roster, and it can change throughout even the season. Once they get into the regular season, the roster is still in a state of flux. They're still signing and cutting players, but that's kind of the unofficial official record or unofficial official roster for the team after they get out of the preseason. Then they get into the regular season, 17-game season. They play 6 of the games against their interdivision opponents. There's 4 divisions in each conference. The Bengals are in the AFC North. There's a cardinal direction for each division, north, south, east, west, and each conference has 4 divisions. Each team plays their divisional rival twice per season. So that's 3 rivals, play each one 2 times. That's 6 divisional games. Then you play 11 other games for all the various other teams. The way that they kind of do the regular season records is based on your strength of schedule from the previous season. It's another way to kind of balance the playing field so that the bad teams aren't always bad and the good teams aren't always good. When you finish first in your division, next season you play all of the other teams that finished first in their divisions the previous year also, and vice versa. If you finish last in your division, you play all of the teams that finished last in their division the previous year. So in theory, the stronger teams are playing a stronger strength of schedule. The weaker teams play an easier strength of schedule to give them a little bit more chance to come back and not just constantly get beat down every single week. Once the teams play the 17-game season, they will have 1 bye week off. But once all the teams play basically 18 weeks through, they determine who goes to the playoffs based on those 17-game rankings. 7 teams from each conference go into the playoffs, and the top 1 team from each conference gets a bye. The 6 other teams play a playoff game, and then they go on from there. So it's like a seeded tree tournament. You go from 14 all the way down to 2 in the Super Bowl, and whoever wins the Super Bowl is the winner. Last season, it was the Kansas City Chiefs. The Bengals lost the AFC Championship game to the Chiefs, which was 1 game prior to the Super Bowl. So the Bengals came up 1 game short last year. They were almost in the Super Bowl. They were in the Super Bowl 2 years before that, which was Joe Burrow's second season, Jamar Chase first season, T. Higgins second season. They were close, but they lost, as we know. But now that we've gone through all the machinations of the NFL, we know how the structure of the season works. Let's get into actually more Bengals specific content here. So what do you need to know as a Bengals fan specifically, not just an NFL fan? You know about football, you know about the NFL. What about the Bengals? Why should you root for the Bengals out of all the other teams? Well, the Bengals were founded in 1968 by Paul Brown, and his son, Mike Brown, has been involved with the team since the founding, and Mike Brown is the current owner. Paul Brown has since passed away. Mike was Paul's son. Mike was always involved with the money, and so Paul was a football genius who started his own team up in Cleveland, you may know as the Cleveland Browns. We'll get to them in a little bit later, but he was a legendary coach who had started his own team, won many championship teams previously, and then had to start his own team in Cincinnati called the Cincinnati Bengals. So there's always been this rivalry between the Bengals and the Browns, not just because they're the 2 professional football teams in Ohio, but because Paul Brown started the Browns in Cleveland and then was fired as the head coach and kicked out of his own franchise, basically, by Art Modell in Cleveland. Art Modell is also dead, but he was the owner of Modell's sporting goods store. I've never been to one, but apparently it was like a sporting goods store when they used to have those type of things. And they didn't even sell guns. But the Browns got rid of Paul Brown. He was very bitter, as you would imagine, being kicked out of your own business that you started, basically. So he just decided to get back at his former team and start his own franchise. And he decided to put it in Ohio. And he was going to put the team in Columbus, but they decided that it was a little bit too close to Cleveland. And there was already a lot of fans of Ohio State that may be competing with the Browns in terms of football fandom. So they moved to Cincinnati, which was at the time up and coming city on the Ohio River. Things were looking good. Cincinnati's going to be like the center of the economy going forward, right? Well, I mean, Cincinnati is a nice town. It's one of the smaller cities in the NFL, but it's good. I don't think they would rather go anywhere else, but they might if you make them. Paul Brown Stadium is named Paycor Stadium now for money reasons, but their lease is up. And that's the thing that's kind of a little bit different about the Bengals organization. They, as far as I know, they don't really pay any money to the stadium. The county apparently owns the stadium, and in theory, the Bengals lease the stadium, but the Bengals are like the sole occupant of the stadium. They pretty much have full reign over the stadium. And they're coming up to 2026 where they could say, if they don't reach an agreement with Hamilton County, they could threaten to move the team away. That's kind of the thing that some teams have done. Like the Oakland Raiders are now the Las Vegas Raiders, and the Indianapolis Colts used to be the Baltimore Colts. The current Los Angeles Chargers used to be the San Diego Chargers. So teams move around to different cities over time based on tax advantages they can get from whatever city, and who's going to pay for the stadium, and whatever sweet deals they can get from the politicians that are in their area. So that's all part of this. Mike Brown and the Blackburn family are playing the city, against the team, and saying, it's kind of like holding the team hostage in a lot of ways. Like, well, if you don't give us what we want, we'll move this team out of here. So that's great. If you're a kid, one of the first things that you gravitate towards is the uniforms and the colors and how they look. I think the Bengals have the coolest helmets when they have the orange base helmets with the black stripes. The white helmet with the black stripes, I know a lot of people like the whiteout thing, but it doesn't really do it for me. Like, there needs to be more orange. I know white and black is the theme, but there needs to be some orange, a little color. We need a little something. So I really like the orange helmet. It looks like a big jack-o'-lantern, and it's got black stripes. It looks like a tiger. It looks amazing. It really pops on the screen. And their uniforms, they've been redesigned recent years. They used to have these weird looking uniforms with too many colors. It was too complicated. Now, they did kind of the Nike redesign where it's very sleek. It's all kind of one color, not too many stripes or patches or anything. It's not too busy, It's very cool looking. It's very sleek. It's very modern. I like the Bengals uniforms that they got going on right now. Go to the Bengals Pro Shop, buy yourself a Jamar Chase jersey, Uno jersey. You can get a T. Higgins jersey. He's number 5, like I said. That's one of the things I want to make a point of doing is when I mention a player, I want to try to mention their number also, so that a new listener, somebody who's not familiar with the players in the roster, when you're watching, you can't really see their name, but you can see their number a lot easier. So I think if I talk about the player and mention their number, it's going to be easier for you to follow along at home who I'm talking about. Number 9, Joe Burrow. Number 1, Jamar Chase. Number 5, T. Higgins. 83, Tyler Boyd. 28, Joe Mixon. All these guys that you can watch out for. And when you watch the game, you can know who they are, especially in the preseason. That is what's really difficult about watching the preseason games, is all these numbers. You have no idea who these guys are. You're like, who is this weird number I've never even seen? Who's number 39, number 45? Who are these guys that I've never seen before and I'm probably never going to see again? It's, they're kind of just like temporary numbers that they throw on these guys. If it's just some kind of like random number that you've never seen before, it's like, oh, that guy's probably like number 90 on the roster. We're not going to see him next week. But it's just kind of funny. But the uniforms do look pretty cool. The mascot is the Bengal Tiger, but it's Houday the Tiger. And they got this Houday. Houday's the chant. There's some kind, you can look up the history of the Houday, where it came from. Some people say it's because there's a Houday, or I don't know if it's pronounced Houday, but kind of like Houday Brewery for beer. So they would say like the vendors at the games would be saying Houday to get the fans, buy this Houday beer, or the fans would be like Houday. So that's maybe where it came from, but that's kind of the chant where it's like Houday, Houday, Houday think going to beat them Bengals? Nobody, right? And that what came from the 88-89 team, which also had Ickey Woods, Ickey Shuffle. So when I was growing up, all the kids, it's not really a dance per se. It's like it sounds, it's kind of a shuffle where Ickey Woods was the running back for this Super Bowl team. He was, I think it was his rookie year. Ickey did not have a very long career, unfortunately. Like a lot of running backs, his career was cut short by injuries. But Ickey, I think he made like 2.5, 3 seasons. But Ickey, he would score a touchdown. He was this big butt, big legged, big everything. I think he went to UNLV, University of Las Vegas. And he was pretty fast, but he was just a big bruising, bust through the line and run over guys type of runner. But whenever he would score a touchdown, he would do the Ickey Shuffle, which was this dance where he would just kind of take the ball in one hand and hop on one foot to the left twice, and then hop on the right foot to the right twice. Like he's kind of like tipping over the one way and then tipping over the other way, and then he'd come back the other way and then spike it down the middle. And then all the fans would go crazy. Ickey Shuffle! And all the kids, when you'd, see them at the middle school game, they'd be like trying to do the Ickey Shuffle. Because it's not a hard dance to do. There's not like, make yourself look like you're falling over. But everybody loved the Ickey Shuffle. And that was even when Paul Brown was alive. He died, I want to say Paul Brown died in 1990 or 91. And apparently he told Ickey Woods that he was like, I'm not really into the whole dancing thing, but my wife really likes that Ickey Shuffle, so you keep doing it. So, it was all cool with Paul Brown. He encouraged it, and the fans loved it. So it was kind of a trademark thing back then. That's kind of the thing that has drawn me to the Bengals throughout the years is they're not just a team of winning. I mean, I guess if you're looking for winning, the Bengals might not always be the best team for you. They are recently, but there were some years where the winning wasn't necessarily the most important thing. It was the fun. And that's what it should be about, if you ask me. But, some of these teams like the New England Patriots, when they were winning all these Super Bowls with Tom Brady, it wasn't very fun to root for the Patriots. Like, they were just very boring, very methodical, very regimented. They've got Bill Belichick, who's doing his constant, disinterested, tough guy, doesn't want to... I don't know, why do they even have Bill Belichick do the press conferences? I wish they would just put everybody out of their misery and just stop doing them. Anyway, Bill Belichick, no fun. New England Patriots, no fun. Cincinnati Bengals, all the fun. One of the other fun players in Bengals history, Chad Johnson. Chad Ochocinco, you may know him. Chad Ochocinco Johnson. He's one of the players who's going into the Bengals Ring of Honor this year. But Chad, as you may know, was all-pro wide receiver. Amazing. Has most of the Bengals records for receiving, yards, touchdowns, catches, all that stuff. AJ Green looked like he was going to get there, but injuries cut his career short. But Chad had amazing showmanship. He was always doing crazy celebrations. He was doing marriage proposals to the cheerleaders on the sidelines. He was talking to the referees. He was talking to the other players, talking about kiss the baby. And people were like, what does that even mean? He's like, I'm going to make you kiss the baby, Nobody had any idea what kiss the baby meant. He had celebrations where he would jump up into the camera operator's booth. He grabbed the camera from the cameraman and was taking a view of his family up in the sidelines. He was doing all kinds of cha-cha dances and salsa dances. He took the pylon from the end zone and used it as a putter to putt the ball after a touchdown. So many crazy things. Taking a look back at the 2022 Bengals season, they didn't quite make it to the Super Bowl like they did previously. It was a pretty good season. They got off to a rough start because Joe Burrow had appendicitis right before the season started. He had to get his appendix out. He lost 15 or 20 pounds. So they had kind of a rough start. They lost their first 2 games to the Steelers and the Cowboys, and they finished strong. They won 10 in a row and lost in the AFC Championship game to the Chiefs. Going into the 2023 season, they lost Jesse Bates, they lost Von Bell, they lost a few other guys from the team last year, but they also gained a few. So they still have most of their core players remaining from the Super Bowl team and last year's team that went to the AFC Championship game. They still have Joe Burrow at quarterback, number 9. They still have Pro Bowl wide receiver Jamar Chase. They still have T. Higgins. They still have DJ Reader, number 98, at nose tackle. But they also have a lot of other players who need to step up. So some of the players that we need to watch going into the 2023 season, one of them I'm keeping an eye on is Dax Hill, their first-round pick last year. He's a safety who's replacing Jesse Bates, who was on a franchise tag last year. Franchise contract, 1-year contract, and the Bengals and Jesse Bates couldn't come to an agreement about a long-term contract extension. So Jesse ended up going to Atlanta to play for the Falcons under a long-term contract and a lot of money. Good for him. But that means Dax Hill, their first-round pick, needs to step up at safety. Some of the other rookies that we want to take a look at are Chase Brown, the running back that they drafted. They lost Samaje Perine, who was the second string or one of their backup running backs, you could say, to Joe Mixon, although Samaje Perine did have an extensive workload all last season throughout the playoffs into their Super Bowl run. He was even in on the last play of the Bengals Super Bowl game. So Samaje was great at pass protection out of the backfield. Joe Mixon is not known for his pass blocking at all. A lot of times it looks like Joe Mixon is too quick to get out and look for a pass instead of blocking somebody, where he should be trying to block and protect. He's like looking for a pass. It's like, no, Joe Mixon, please help with the blocking, no catching. So we're going to have to see how this rookie Chase Brown out of Illinois, how he can kind of fill in the role for Samaje Perine and carry the load. There's some other guys. Charlie Jones, we're going to have to see. He's a wide receiver out of Purdue. He may be a punt return, kick return kind of guy, but he also could be a slot receiver to kind of be backup for Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd is going into the last year of his contract, number 83, Tyler Boyd. He's getting close to 30 in the NFL. Your career doesn't last very long, not for long. He's getting up there in age. They may be looking to replace him maybe next year. So Charlie Jones, and then Andre Yosivash, wide receiver out of Princeton. 7th-round pick. They just kind of like his athleticism because he was a national champion in the indoor heptathlon, which is 7 track and field events. It's like sprints, jumps, hurdles, throw the shot put, distance running, all kinds of different events, obviously 7 different events. But he's got amazing athleticism. The only thing to watch out for about him is he's got size, like T. Higgins, number 5. Yosivash is going to be 80 from Hawaii, and he's got big size. He's 6'3", 205 or so. He's good speed, good jumping ability. He can go up and leap and catch the ball. The only thing to watch out for with Yosivash is he may not have the quickness, the short space quickness to get in and out of his cuts and in and out of his breaks on short routes. He may be more of a downfield, long striding kind of guy, which there's a place for that, but to get separation, no matter how fast you are, there's fast guys all over the NFL. So speed can't be the only thing. You have to have a little bit of quickness and separation ability to get open as a wide receiver. So we're going to have to see, can he separate, not just does he have the speed and athleticism. We're also going to see if Yosivash can catch with his hands. One of the things that you could see on tape is he tended to catch the ball with his body, meaning like he would let the ball basically use his body as a backstop and cup it instead of reaching out, extending his hands and grabbing, snatching the ball out of the air, 2 feet or however long his arms are, away from his body so that he's snagging it instead of letting it hit him, basically. The reason you want to do that is because if there's a defender right next to you, the defender, you want to extend in front of the defender so you catch it into your hands before they have a chance to grab at it, swat it away, knock it down, make any kind of contact with it. But also, it's easier for the defender to swat it away from your body and get it out if you just let it hit, as opposed to you have it held firmly in your grasp in your hands. They can't do that. So we'll have to see, does Iosivas have the ability to grab it with his hands instead of letting it hit him in the body? And I have to admit, when I look back at film of myself in college, I was too much of a body catcher. I let the ball get into my body too much. So if I were in the pros, that would be something I would want to work on too. The other thing to watch as we go into the season is keep an eye on Joe Burrow's strained calf. He strained at the beginning of training camp. It looks like he was doing some workouts recently where he was able to throw and run, but they said he's going to be out several weeks. So we're hoping that Joe Burrow is making it back for game 1. If he's not back for game 1, we just need Joe Burrow back so that he doesn't re-injure himself later, and that so he can continue to play without any hindrances or re-injury risk for the rest of the season. If that means missing the first couple weeks or 2, that's okay. Obviously, it's not ideal. You want Joe Burrow to be able to play and be healthy for all the games that he can be, but we're going to have to watch and see how he's able to recover from that. We've been pretty good so far as no major injuries in training camp. You always want to watch around the league to see who's getting injured. We already saw down in Miami, Jalen Ramsey hurt his knee. He's going to be out after having meniscus surgery. He's going to be out until they're saying maybe December. So a lot of guys are dropping. You have to watch out for that. So we're hoping that Bengals are able to get through to the regular season without too many injuries. That's a big thing that determines the success of a team. You can spend a lot of time crafting your roster and doing a lot of calculations about how the team is going to play, but you can't determine when and where and who is going to get injured, although injuries are kind of a part of the game. And that's really what plays a biggest factor in who goes to the Super Bowl, is who can stay healthiest, who can have the most star players playing at the end of the year. A lot of teams, they start out the season with great success, and then their star player gets injured, and then they unravel. It all falls apart. So it's about keeping your star players healthy all year. Joe Burrow is the face of the franchise. He's the reason you tune in every single week to love this franchise and love Joe Burrow. He's the golden boy. He's the golden goose of the franchise. He's the one who brings all the fans into the stands with their money. So Mike Brown needs to figure that out ASAP. You got to keep the golden goose happy. Keep laying those golden eggs, Joe Burrow. Keep it up. Don't be upset with Mike Brown and get into a chess match. You know Joe Burrow loves to play chess. He's very intellectual. He's very strategic, not just on the football field, but in business. Joe Burrow is very cautious about who he lets into his inner circle. He doesn't give a lot of interviews. He's a very private person. He's very calculated. Love that about Joe Burrow. That's why they need to keep him happy. They need to keep him around. He came in at the 2020 pandemic season, so he didn't have any training camp then because everything was canceled. They didn't do any training camps or preseasons at all during the pandemic. Then his rookie year, he got his knee blown out, offensive line collapsed. He got his ACL, MCL, meniscus, PCL, probably everything torn off, reconstructed. He went through a huge rehab process to come back in 2021. Everybody was so concerned. Is his knee going to hold up? Is he going to make it? He wore this huge, bulky knee brace the entire season. You could tell he wasn't really the same slippery kind of guy that he had been in years past. He wasn't able to elude guys and get out as quickly as he had been. And that's a big part of Joe Burrow's game, is buying time, getting away from people. So that was kind of rough to see in the beginning. But he as the season went on in 2021, he came back. But he got off to a rough start. Last year, 2022, he got his appendix out right before the season started. So that was a big setback. He thought he was not going to have any rehab to do because his knee was fine that year. He wasn't going to wear a knee brace last year. He didn't wear a knee brace last year. So his agility and athleticism was back. Then all of a sudden his appendix is out. So he has internal surgery right before the season starts. The worst luck. This year he's got a strained calf right before the season. So hopefully this is just a minor setback. It won't be anything like any of the previous years, and then he can get back on the road to success. We also have T. Higgins contract situation, in addition to Joe Burrow, that Bengals need to get ironed out. The Bengals did sign contracts with some of their other key players on defense, specifically Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. They're two inside linebackers who play pretty much every down on defense. So they're important pieces. Also, their Pro Bowler, Trey Hendrickson, they extended him for an additional year. So he's going to be under contract until 2025. So a lot of their star stud players on defense, they've got re-signed. They did not re-sign DJ Reader. He's been having some injuries where he's missed some games, but he is, I think, their best player on defense. He's the one, the engine that makes everything go. He's the linchpin, the capstone. He's it on defense. If you don't have DJ Reader, the entire defense is not going to be as effective. So hopefully they can do something with DJ Reader. He may have to play out this year and prove that he can stay healthy before the Bengals decide. And he's getting up there in age. The Bengals have been burned recently on contracts with guys like Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap, where they gave them big extensions into their second extensions, and they were already getting up there in age, and then they just pretty much fell off a cliff, especially Geno Atkins. He had a shoulder injury, and then he just fell off a cliff and retired. So that was kind of weird. So the Bengals might not be too eager to give out a bunch of money to a bunch of guys on defense like DJ Reader, but you would hope that if he can stay healthy and prove that he's been as dominant as he was in years past, that they'll keep him around. Because you don't see too many other nose tackles as dominant throughout the rest of the league. So he's impossible to replace. He's irreplaceable, so they need to keep him around if at all possible. One thing they did gain in the offseason was one of their weaknesses last year at offensive line, and especially the tackle. Orlando Brown, number 75, was previously on the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. He was the arch enemy of the Bengals. Now he's joined the dark side and joined the Bengals. He was a two-time Pro Bowler for the Chiefs at left tackle, two-time Pro Bowler for the Baltimore Ravens, where he was drafted as a right tackle. So he's played both right and left, but he wants to be a left tackle because left tackles make the most money. If you have a right-handed quarterback, when he drops back to pass, he's going to have his right hand at the back, so his body's going to be kind of angled more looking towards the right, and the quarterback's tendency is going to throw to the right side more often, so he's not looking in the left as often. So it's called his blind side. The quarterback can't see what's going on as much. He's still supposed to be scanning and looking to the left, but his attention a lot of the time is taking his eyes to the right more. So in theory, the left tackle is more important. I don't necessarily agree that that's true, but left tackle gets paid more money. So that's why Orlando Brown especially wants to play left tackle. His dad, Orlando Brown Sr., played for the Cleveland Browns and was a long time. He actually had a weird incident with this referee. I think it was Jeff Triplett. I can't remember who the referee was, but the referee threw the flag at Orlando Brown and hit him in the eye and caused a lot of damage. So that's why now the referees have to throw the ball or throw the flags. They're supposed to throw them up into the air and not throw them at the player. And then they suspended Orlando Brown for pushing that referee. I was upset at the referee. I was like, I can't believe this stupid referee threw the flag into this player's eyeball and he pushed him, and they're like, oh, you're suspended for touching the referee. It's like, man, I would have broken that referee's arms off if I were Orlando Brown hitting me in the eye, because his career was pretty much over after that. He had to have surgery. He had nerve damage in his eye from this stupid referee hitting him. Anyway, don't ever be a referee. And there's no love for referees from anybody. Nobody is like, oh, I love that referee. There's a lot of other interesting players on the Bengals throughout this preseason and regular season. One other undrafted rookie free agent, Mac Hippenhammer, wide receiver, number 14. He's just a fun name to say, Hippenhammer. So keep an eye out for him. There weren't too many coaching changes. They still have Zach Taylor as the head coach, Brian Callahan as the offensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo as the defensive coordinator. And so those three, and then you've got Darren Simmons is the special team coach. So those are the main decision-making coaches, the ones who call the plays, decide what they're going to do on offense, what they're going to do on defense. They're okay. I mean, I'm still of the opinion Zach Taylor is 33 wins, 38 losses, 1 tie in his coaching career overall, including the wins in the playoffs. He's 5-2 in the playoffs. So he's got a winning record in the playoffs, which is great. But he still has a losing record, and he especially has a losing record without Joe Burrow and without Jamar Chase. Joe Burrow's record without Jamar Chase even was not that great. He only won 4 games in his rookie year. Actually, he only won 2 games before he got hurt. So he didn't have a great start to his rookie year. He had a lame A.J. Green really sucking up a lot of the contract. A.J. Green on the franchise tag for $1 million a year was on the way out and really not giving him anything. So I can't blame Joe Burrow for not having a great rookie year. So I'll put most of that on Zach Taylor too. So what I'm getting at here is without Joe Burrow, without Jamar Chase, would Zach Taylor be a successful head coach? Would he have anything close to a 500 record? I don't know, because when I watch the offense with Zach Taylor, if Zach Taylor's personality is extremely boring, extremely conventional, vanilla, missionary only, nothing out of the box, only inside the box. Zach Taylor has no spices, no spice, no salt, no pepper, no nothing. So he's very predictable, and it makes it very easy for teams to counter Zach Taylor. Whatever it is he's going to do, they already know 10 steps ahead of him, and they're already counteracting it. So without Joe Burrow, without Jamar Chase, I don't know if this team would be any good at all. They may be horrible. They definitely would not have gone to the Super Bowl without those two. I don't know if they would make it to the playoffs without Joe Burrow or Jamar Chase. I think both of those two, in addition to T. Higgins, they make Zach Taylor's offense work. It's not Zach Taylor scheming up good plays to make the players look good. It's really the players executing at such a high level that whatever play that they called would work. It really doesn't matter what plays Zach Taylor calls. They would all work because the players are so good. That's the thing that when I watch other teams and other coaches like the 49ers, sometimes like the Dolphins, players are just wide open because the play design is good. So the scheme is making it work for the player, and the player is getting wide open. The defense is completely confused by the play. They don't know what's going on. They don't know how to react. They can't even begin to defend the players, much less figure out and try to stop them. With the Bengals, every single play is hard. It looks like everything is so difficult. Everything is contested. The defense is right on top of the guys. There's no wide open guys for the Bengals. You never see guys just wide open running down the field. There never was like, oh, that was an amazing trick play. They got him. It's like, no, the Bengals just have to do it the hard way every single time. And it's when you have good players that can do that, that can be successful. But I would like to see it not be so hard. I would like to see the coaches make it easy to win, make it easy for the players to just show off their skills and their abilities and not have to just go beast mode every single play just to get a first down or just to scrape out a little victory here and there. It shouldn't be that hard. So I'm really belaboring the point that I'm obviously not sold on Zach Taylor whatsoever. I think it also comes from the fact that one time I saw him in an interview say that he never played a single play of defense in his entire career. He only played offense and he only played quarterback. And it's just like, how can you be an NFL head coach? So basically he has no knowledge about defense, at least from a playing perspective at all, which really kind of makes me concerned for him as an NFL head coach. It really makes me uneasy because I don't think he really knows that much about the entire game. Maybe he's good as like a play caller, maybe, or a quarterback coach. I just don't see it. I think Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are kind of more like the leaders, and Zach Taylor is just kind of there along for the ride, honestly. But hey, maybe that's all you need. If you just want somebody to do their job as calling plays and being an offensive coordinator and getting out of the way, I guess maybe Zach Taylor is good for that. And guess what? There's no salary cap for coaches, and they don't have to report what coaches make. I bet Zach Taylor is one of the lowest paid coaches in the entire league because Mike Brown is saving all that money if he can. Mike Brown is not spending money on coaches if he doesn't have to. So the Bengals don't necessarily have the most high-end coaching talent, you wouldn't say. They get by with what they can, but they don't have coaching superstars, you wouldn't say. So we'll see what happens with that. But so far in training camp and before the preseason, we can't really tell too much. You always hear from training camp beat reporters, oh, everybody's looking good. Everybody's in the best shape of their life. Nobody's making any stupid mistakes. The defense a lot of the time looks more productive than the offense, just because the offense is still kind of gelling and getting in a sync with the rhythm of the plays and how they're supposed to be executed. It sometimes can be a little bit easier for a defense that's more reactionary. You're just kind of playing and reacting to what you see in front of you. It's a little bit easier to do and get into sync with your team if you're on defense than offense. So as expected, we're not seeing too much out of the offense, especially since Joe Burrow has been sitting out the entire preseason. We're not going to see any Joe Burrow in any of the preseason games, in any training camp. He's doing a little bit of training to come back from his strained calf, but we don't expect to see any Joe Burrow. So that's another reason why the offense in the preseason probably isn't going to be hitting on all cylinders as we would expect it to in the regular season. Hopefully they can get Joe Burrow practicing so that by the time his first game comes, whichever week that is, whether it's week 1 or week 4 or whatever week, whenever Joe Burrow gets into the lineup, he'll be able to play and play well. The backup quarterback situation right now is looking pretty grim. They have Trevor Siemian, Jake Browning, and Reed Sinnott, none of whom have really done too much. The only one that has really any experience at all is Trevor Siemian. He was a starter for the Bears and the Broncos a little bit. He's bounced around the league a lot. He played for the Saints too, but he's, I guess he's an okay backup. He's been in the league long enough. He's hung around long enough. He must have some ability, but it's never really taken him to a starter. So we really need Joe Burrow to come back as soon as possible, or it is going to be a rough start to the season until he gets back. Hopefully the defense can pick it up. The young defensive backs, there's a lot of turnover from last year. There's going to be a lot of new faces in the defensive backfield, especially on the safety. And they got rid of or said goodbye to Jesse Bates and Von Bell, their two safeties. So they're going to have two new players there, probably going to be Dax Hill and Nick Scott. And we'll have to see who plays on the cornerback spot. It's probably going to be Cam Taylor-Britt. And then we're going to have to see whether or not Chidobe Awuzie can come back from his ACL, or if it's going to be the rookie DJ Turner from Michigan, who ran the fastest 40-yard dash in the combine this year, ran a 4.26 40, fastest guy in the draft. He's not that big. He's only 5'10". He's got kind of short arms, not that physical, but the speed obviously is there. The quickness is there. So if Cheeto can't come back from the knee injury, we'll see if DJ Turner is the starter. Now, I mentioned that the Bengals play in the AFC North. Let's do a quick rundown of the AFC North, the other teams in the AFC North besides the Bengals. Like I mentioned, the Browns are the team in Cleveland. They're the interstate rival, the Battle of Ohio. They play each other twice a year, and there's a lot of bitterness from a franchise perspective and from a fan base perspective. You have to remember that for players, they can play on the Browns, the Steelers, and the Bengals. It doesn't really matter to them who they're playing for that week necessarily. So whoever is signing their paycheck, that's who they're playing for that week. They don't really care about these historic rivalries or what happened 10 or 20 years ago between different teams. They don't have any knowledge of that. A lot of them, they weren't Bengals fans growing up. They don't know about the history of the team. They don't know about the history that you're going to learn about as we go through this podcast. They don't appreciate the team like that. But they will once they get out of the league or once their career is over. They'll maybe take a step back and get into it. You see a lot of these old players get really excited about it, and you see like Chad Ochocinco and Pac-Man Jones still get involved with looking at the former team, the Bengals. So some of them do, some of them move on to other things. Probably the number one rival for Cincinnati is the Cleveland Browns, just because of the history of Paul Brown starting the Browns and then getting kicked out and having to start the Bengals. So kind of the initial team that Paul Brown started and then his new team being the Bengals, that's a big rivalry. Probably the second biggest rival the Bengals have are the Pittsburgh Steelers, just because in some of the recent years when the Bengals went to the playoffs, they lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers in horrible fashion. We don't need to rehash all the stuff that happened, but there are a lot of ugly games with the Steelers, a lot of penalties, a lot of injuries, a lot of nastiness. So there is no love lost between Steelers and Bengals. There's definitely some animosity between them. And then the Baltimore Ravens were formerly the Cleveland Browns. They moved Art Modell in his infinite wisdom after getting rid of Paul Brown, then many decades later, moved the team out of Cleveland to Baltimore. So the Baltimore Ravens used to be the old Cleveland Browns up until the mid-90s. Once the franchise left Cleveland, they were immediately blessed with good fortune and won the Super Bowl. So obviously something bad is going on in Cleveland to not let them even get to the Super Bowl. The Browns have never been to the Super Bowl, not much less never won a Super Bowl. The Steelers have won several Super Bowls. The Ravens have won at least a Super Bowl, 2 Super Bowls with Joe Flacco and then Trent Dilfer. So Ravens and Steelers have had some success. The Bengals have been to 3 Super Bowls, have not won any of them so far. But I would at least take going to the Super Bowl 3 times over none at all, which the Browns have the ignominy of. Looking ahead, we're going into the first preseason game, Game 1 against the Green Bay Packers. That's going to be the first football we've seen in many months. I want to say since the AFC Championship game in February. So what is that, like 6 months? So long. It seems like the offseason gets longer every year. Football is finally going to be back. Now, when you watch the preseason, what are you looking for? Since the preseason is a little bit strange, it's not on the big network television broadcast like NBC, ESPN. They do it locally. So you get the local team broadcast. You get a little bit of a different feel. It's kind of unique. It's kind of cool if you appreciate seeing like the old former players. They're going to have Anthony Munoz up in the booth doing the play-by-play announcing for television. And they'll have interviews with players on the sidelines. And the other thing to watch out for is the new players who are probably never going to play again. See if any of them make anything interesting happen. Some of the play in the preseason is a little bit sloppy. There may be some broken plays just because players are new. They don't really have that much experience with what they're doing. So things can kind of get a little hectic. There can be a lot of penalties in the preseason. So things get a little sloppy. But just have fun. Watch for those players. Like I said, trying to make the roster, trying to make plays. Whatever these guys can do to make the roster, they're going to try to do. So that's going to be interesting to see. Hopefully nobody gets injured. Obviously, you never want to see players get injured any time, but you never want to see anybody get injured before the real games even begin. That was a monster episode, the preseason primer for 2023. We got new fans and old fans alike primed up and ready to go. Probably more information than you ever required to be a football fan, but hopefully I filled in all the blanks. If I didn't, let me know in the comments. Tell me about anything I could have done better, anything that I forgot, or anything that I didn't explain correctly, or anything that I could do better on the next primer next year. Let me know if you want to see another primer, or maybe not at all. Maybe you're like, oh, I already know all this stuff already. You're an idiot. So maybe it's not even necessary. I won't do one. But I thought it'd be a good idea, like I said, just for people who want to get into the sport and maybe have no experience with football or the Bengals whatsoever. You can get in now. On the next episode of Bengal Bites, we're going to be doing a full breakdown of preseason game 1. We're going to do a detailed analysis and see who was good, who was not so good, anything interesting that happened in the game, in the broadcast, anything cool that happened we want to talk about. We'll talk about that. We'll also discuss anything that happened after the game in terms of press conferences, interviews, stats, anything that would be interesting to add more flavor to that you want to check out. So thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I know it was a long one. Thank you so much for sticking with us. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get this podcast, rate, review, share it with your friends. Tell them, hey, there's this Bengals podcast out there that they might be interested in if they want to get into this season. So with that, I'm going to say hoo day and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.